It was a quiet night in the small town of Oak Ridge, a place known for its vast open fields, dense woods, and clear skies. The kind of place where time seemed to stand still, and the rhythms of life followed the seasons rather than the ticking of a clock. Sam Mitchell, a 35-year-old farmer, was tending to his crops under the stars, something he had done almost every night since he inherited the family farm from his father. There was a certain peace in the routine, a tranquility that came from the familiarity of the land, the night, and the stars. Tonight, however, was different. As Sam stood in the middle of the field, hands on his hips and a light breeze brushing against his face, he noticed something unusual. The stars, which usually glittered in a predictable pattern, seemed to be shifting. A bright light, far too large and too close to be a star, hovered above the fields, casting an eerie glow on the land below. It moved slowly at first, almost lazily, as if surveying the area. Then, without warning, it darted across the sky with unnatural speed, leaving a trail of light behind it. Sam's heart raced. He had seen shooting stars and satellites before, but this was no ordinary celestial event. This was something else, something he couldn't explain. He stood frozen, eyes wide, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Without taking his eyes off the object, Sam reached into his pocket for his phone. His hands trembled as he dialed the number of his brother, Mike, who lived just a few miles away. "Mike, you seeing this?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Seeing what?" Mike replied groggily, clearly having been woken from a deep sleep. "Look outside. There's something in the sky." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of Mike's door creaking open. Then, silence. "Sam, what is that?" Mike finally whispered, his voice tinged with awe and fear. "I don't know, but it's getting closer." The two brothers watched in awe and fear as the light grew brighter, illuminating the entire field. The animals in the barn began to stir, their restless movements adding to the tension that hung in the air. The wind seemed to pick up, swirling around the farm with an eerie force that sent shivers down Sam's spine. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. The night, which had been filled with the soft sounds of the countryside, now seemed deathly quiet. Even the crickets had fallen silent, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The following day, Oak Ridge was buzzing with rumors. Sam wasn't the only one who had seen the strange light in the sky. Several townspeople reported seeing something similar: bright lights, odd shapes, and unexplained noises. Some dismissed it as a weather phenomenon, while others were convinced it was something more sinister. Sam and Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They decided to investigate the field where the light had appeared. As they walked through the tall grass, they noticed a strange circular pattern burned into the ground. The grass was flattened, and the soil beneath it was scorched, as if something incredibly hot had landed there. "This isn't normal," Mike said, kneeling down to inspect the ground. "What could have done this?" "I don't know," Sam replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "But whatever it wasn't from around here." The circular pattern wasn't the only thing that disturbed them. As they explored the area further, they found small, metallic fragments scattered across the field. The fragments were unlike anything they had ever seen: thin, light, and impossibly smooth to the touch. When Sam tried to bend one, it resisted with a strength that seemed impossible for such a delicate-looking material. "What do you think this is?" Mike asked, turning a fragment over in his hands. "No idea," Sam replied. "But we need to keep this quiet. If word gets out, we'll have every conspiracy theorist and UFO hunter in the state camping out on our land." Mike nodded in agreement, though the unease in his eyes was clear. They gathered up the fragments and decided to store them in the barn, hidden away from prying eyes. But as they did, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That night, Sam couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the events in his mind, trying to make sense of what he had seen. The image of the strange light, the burned circle in the field, and the metallic fragments haunted him. Around midnight, just as he was drifting off, a soft humming sound filled the air. It started faintly, almost imperceptible, but quickly grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the house. Sam bolted upright in bed and rushed to the window, His heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the horizon. The light was back. It hovered over the field once again, but this time it wasn't alone. Smaller lights, like glowing orbs, floated around the larger object. They moved with purpose, as if searching for something or someone. Sam's hand shook as he grabbed his phone to call Mike, but before he could dial, the lights suddenly shot towards the house, surrounding it in a blinding glow. The windows rattled, and the air became thick with an unnatural energy. The hairs on Sam's arms stood on end as the temperature in the room plummeted. And then, everything went black. When Sam awoke, he was no longer in his bed. He was lying on a cold metal surface, surrounded by darkness. The air was frigid, and the smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt heavy, as if they were weighed down by invisible chains. He tried to move but found himself restrained. Panic set in as he realized he wasn't alone. Strange, shadowy figures moved around him, their movements quick and deliberate. They were tall and slender, with elongated limbs and large, almond-shaped eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Sam's breath caught in his throat as one of the figures approached him. It reached out with a long, thin finger, and a wave of cold washed over him as it touched his forehead. Images flashed through his mind: strange landscapes, unfamiliar stars, and otherworldly beings. It was as if the creature was probing his thoughts, searching for something deep within his consciousness. The fear was overwhelming, but Sam couldn't scream. He couldn't move. All he could do was watch as the figures continued their work, their cold, emotionless eyes staring into his soul. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that dark, sterile place. Hours, maybe even days passed, but Sam had no way of knowing. The figures never spoke, never made a sound, but their presence was suffocating. They probed and prodded, their icy fingers leaving a trail of pain and confusion. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The restraints holding Sam down released, and he collapsed onto the cold metal floor. The figures disappeared into the shadows, and the room around him dissolved into darkness. When Sam opened his eyes again, he was back in his bed, drenched in sweat. The light was gone, and the house was silent. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream, a nightmare born from stress and fear. But as he sat up, he felt a sharp pain in his arm. Looking down, Sam saw a small circular scar, as if something had been implanted under his skin. His stomach churned, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He rubbed at the scar, but the skin felt hard and unyielding, like something foreign lay just beneath the surface. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and fear. Sam tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, but the scar on his arm was a constant reminder that something had happened, something irreal and terrifying. He avoided talking about the experience, even with Mike. But as the days passed, he began to notice strange things. Electronics in his house malfunctioned whenever he was near them. The animals in the barn acted skittish, avoiding him as if sensing something unnatural. And every night he dreamed of the cold metal room and the shadowy figures with glowing eyes. The dreams were more than just nightmares, they were vivid, almost real. Sam would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that the figures were standing at the foot of his bed, watching him. He started to sleep with the lights on, but it did little to keep the fear at bay. Then, one night, the dreams became a reality once more. Sam awoke to find himself paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The air in the room was thick, and the familiar humming sound filled his ears. The light returned, seeping in through the windows and bathing the room in an eerie glow. And then they were there, the shadowy figures, standing over him, their cold eyes boring into his soul. This time, Sam fought with everything he had. He struggled against the invisible restraints, his mind screaming in defiance. But it was no use. The figures reached out, their fingers brushing against his skin, and once again, everything went black. When Sam awoke the next morning, the sense of dread and confusion was stronger than ever. He checked his arm.